Connecting, still connecting.
Good
Okay.
evening. Yeah, good evening and welcome to the AGM for Anzgita. My name is Barbara Hines and I'm here to give an overview of the event and introduce our team and give a brief marketing report. Piloting our webinar tonight is Frank Eastoff, Company Secretary, who will manage the slides and polling and the questions. So you'll see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A button where you can ask the questions anytime tonight. The formal AGM will begin in a few minutes with our chair, Professor McCrae, his review of the year and questions. And at 6:25, he will announce our recognition awards. And following that at 6:30, we will have our guest speaker, Dr. Christina Higa, talk with us. The meeting will end at 7 o'clock sharp unless anybody would like to continue further just discussing questions. Now, just for a quick marketing update, because this is my one opportunity to do it. The socks, Frank, we've got brand new socks coming.
Oh, hang on. Oh, sorry, why isn't that working? Thank you.
There we go. They're really popular. These are the second most popular sock for the Sydney Sock Project. And the older ones are on the right, but the new ones are coming. They're in the mail. Be here. We're having a delay, so they'll be here in another week or so. But you'll see the Stomp on COVID one there should be very popular. They are yielding us about $500 a month at the moment for doing practically nothing. And it's Sydney Sock Project's goal to have us receive about $1,000 a month with this new batch. So we also have a new fundraising idea, the Doctor Donation Campaign, Help Me Help Others. And you'll see there that we've started the campaign, again, requires very little effort for probably a steady stream of income. You just click on the QR code there and it will give everybody an opportunity. So you see on the right is Finn McCrae's one with his photo and a caption. And the one on the left is for any person that would like to display this in their own rooms to send me your action photo with a caption, and I will turn that around for you and you can print and post and just give anybody the opportunity. You don't even have to hit a sales pitch for it. So that'll be great. And since we're opening up pretty soon, hopefully from COVID, I thought it'd be a good opportunity to remind everybody that we have a couple of little PR opportunities here. We have a flip book called About Anzgita. It's a short 10-page thing meant to show on an iPad at lunch or over drinks, just to give us a good idea of what Anzgita's work is all about. And also, Professor McCrae held a grand rounds presentation where he went into a bit more depth of the history as well as what our work is. So that link is on our website there at the bottom, anzgita.org/news. So you could use that. And also we produce a monthly newsletter and we are always looking for good reads. So if you are publishing out there, or if you have some interesting information, we would very much appreciate if you send it to us. Now, lastly, our annual report is finished and it will be posted tonight on our website after this meeting. And have a link. You can also download it as a PDF. So I just wanted to say this is my third year with Anzgita, and it's absolutely been my pleasure to work with everybody here. And I'm so looking forward to the future. It's really fun to work for this group of people. These lovely, dedicated people who do wonderful work. So, all right, well, let's start the AGM and I'll turn it over to you, Professor Finley McCrae, our chair. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to you all to the AGM from both local, across the Pacific, elsewhere, and even around the world, from our general members who've registered to attend the AGM this evening. I commend you to the annual report, and I'll mention that a bit later, which is on our website and available as a download as a PDF. Please feel free to do that. What I would like to do in the course of the next 20 minutes is run through the annual general meeting, and then the recognition of awards and review of our the future and our current progress as an association. So the first step then is a motion to accept the minutes of well, first of all, to recognise apologies, and we only have one apology, I believe, and that's Professor Des Ledden from Canada. Are there any other apologies that are before us? No other apologies. So the second item is to accept the minutes of the 2020 AGM, and I look for a mover and seconder for that.
I'd like to nominate that we accept them as a true record.
So Tony Clark moves it, and second.
Di Jones is happy to second that motion to accept the minutes of last year's meeting.
Thank you, Tony and Di. Do we have, please all vote if you can on the screen. Is that what happens, Frank? They vote?
Yes, Finn.
There it is, up before you. It's up before me.
Okay.
Oh.
Right. Yes, we've got a quorum. We've got everyone in favour that's voted, Finn. So that's okay.
Good. All in favour, thank you. So now it's a matter of moving on to the reports of the officers of the association. So we have listed on our website, which is in your agenda to link to, the program coordinators report, our treasurer Alan Studley's report, Frank Eastoff, our secretary's report, and my own report as chair. So I commend you to look at those when you can. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions about them later. So may I have someone to move the motion to accept the reports?
Yes, it's Di Jones speaking. I'd move the motion to accept the report of the officers.
And a seconder?
It's Mark Norrie speaking. I move to second it.
Thank you, Di and Mark. So could we have a vote from the members on the acceptance of the officers' reports? All of you in favour of accepting the reports?
Okay. Yes, everyone who's voted is in favour, Finn. So that motion's passed.
Excellent. So the next item is the election of up to 6 directors, and I'll refer you to the note on the agenda that relates to the election of the 6 directors. We have circulated the opportunity to nominate as directors, and we've received 4 nominations from retiring directors: Di Jones, Peter Catalaris, John Long, and Frank Eastoff. There were no other nominations, but I would, in general, in the future, encourage you to consider nominating for being a director. So as it stands, there's less than the number of vacancies, so I declare them all duly elected for a 2-year term. So congratulations to Di, Peter, John, and Frank. So the next item on the agenda is the chair's review, or do we do the awards?
No, the chair's review, Finn.
The chair's review. Okay. So if we can just turn to those relevant slides, I'd like firstly to thank all of you for attending our AGM. We've got nearly 40 people here attending. And I also like to commend Barb for the excellent annual report, which this year describes our virtual year and draws on the historical paradigm of the Hokulia. I hope that's right, Christina, as we reach out digitally across the Pacific, as distinct from days gone by when there are other means for reaching across the Pacific. We have the next slide. So I'd like to highlight the activities that we've had this year. We've had 11 gastroenterology seminars delivered, and I must say this has all been in the main driven by Associate Professor Chris Hare. 5 COVID seminars that Chris has drawn into expertise in infectious diseases, Mary Shield and Adam Jenny, to whom we're very grateful for their support for those COVID seminars. 14 Pacific Island countries and territories and Timor-Leste participated with up to 80 people in each of these sessions. We've run the postgraduate gastroenterology program in partnership with our colleagues at FNU in the gastroenterology discipline. And our team, our secretarial team and others have been very instrumental in continuing efforts to gain donated and purchased equipment and consumables or chemicals to 8 of our partner hospitals across the Pacific and Timor-Leste. We've been able to furnish the development of a new endoscopy room and centre at Viola Hospital in Tonga and supply benchtop sterilisers to multiple sites across our footprint of training. And finally, supply a specialised compressor in Timor-Leste in our partnered hospital there. So I think we've been quite active, even though necessarily we've been not on the ground. Can I have the next slide? So what does the future hold? Well, the future holds more development of virtual training and mentoring. And here again, I'd like to especially compliment Chris Hare for his efforts. I think the virtual training in endoscopy and remote mentoring, the ETERM program, is especially exciting as it's a novel teaching methodology in gastroenterology, remote teaching methodology, which is going to be world leading in terms of how we can support training virtually. And that's well on the way to being implemented as we speak. So I think that's a great initiative. But apart from that, we've been able to improve our mentoring with various technologies, including WhatsApp and Viber, and address, and we will continue to address issues beyond what we've done, for example, in nutrition. As I've mentioned, we've helped support the capital and other needs of our partners with the help of our industry partners, which I'll mention later. And of course, the ERCP program in Fiji, although somewhat compromised with the impact of COVID, is looking forward to a rosy future with Amini and the team at FNU. So we continue to maximise the benefits of capacity building in the Indo-Pacific for clinicians across the Pacific and support general training and mentoring in those sites. So in conclusion, I'd just like to especially thank all our board members, the indispensable Frank Eastoff, the indefatigable Chris Hare, the sage Tony Clark, the priceless Di Jones, the sound treasurer and financial manager Alan Studley, the epitome of gastroenterological professionalism Peter Catalaris, and we welcome Michael Schultz from Dunedin to our board as our new board member. So thank you all board members, as well as John Long for his strong support with his industrial background. So once again, I commend you to read the annual report with its thoughtful watermark that Barb has been instrumental in her creative thinking. And again, thank Barb for all the work that she's done to support the activities of Anzgita. So that concludes my report for this year. So I would like to move on to announce 3 awards. We give 3 awards each year. Anzgita Recognition Awards. And in usual tradition, we've identified a doctor, a nurse, and an industry partner that we'd like to so honour with a recognition. So this year, the Doctor Award is going to Clinical Associate Professor Alice Lee. So Alice is a clinical associate professor at Macquarie University and currently heads the liver services at Concord and Canterbury Hospitals in Sydney. She's been a trainer on 8 of our programs since 2004 and has shown outstanding leadership in hepatology. So I'd like to congratulate Alice. I don't know, is Alice with us, Frank, tonight or not?
I think so, Finn. I'll need to double check.
Well done, Alice. And thank you for all your great work. Yes, she is. She's on the list, so thank you. And congratulations, Alice. And we're always in awe at your energy in the hepatology space, not only for Anzgita, but much broader across, indeed, at least the Southern Hemisphere, if not part of the Northern Hemisphere. So Alice has been working in Fiji, Myanmar and the Solomons for us. And she's the co-founder and director of Hepatitis B Free, which is a fantastic organisation. So our nurse nomination and award is going to Miss Kim West. Kim is currently the nurse co-order at Wide Bay Hospital and Health Service in Queensland. She's been a trainer on 4 programs since 2016 and involved in the virtual training in 2021. She's made a significant contribution to Anzgita's Myanmar work. So she's been training in Fiji, Myanmar and Timor-Leste, and she's also part of Diane Jones's team of virtual nurse training, which has been, of course, active during this last 18 months. So congratulations, Kim. We'll be passing on your recognition award in due course, something probably a bit more than virtual. We'll probably give you an actual award. So well done. And thank you very much, Kim. So our industry award goes to Mr. Barry Barford. Barry was formerly joint lead of medical aid for Oceania, run with the Barima Rotary Club. From 2018 until his retirement this year, he managed pro bono our aid deliveries in the Pacific and Asia. He also secured substantial funding from Medical Aid for Oceania to cover the costs of many of these deliveries. A major and important contribution to our work, particularly from the logistic point of view, about which we're very grateful. In addition, he organised about $20,000 worth of funding and set up procedures for us to follow in the future. So Barry's now retired from his career role, but we hope he can maintain his connection with us in his retirement. So congratulations and thank you again, Barry, for all your help. So these are the awards that will be passed on to us in hard copy form, not only soft copy form. Congratulations again to Alice, Kim and Barry. So we're moving on now in the agenda. Could we have the next slide? I'd like to now introduce Christina Higa. Christina has been also a major support to us through her work as co-director of the Pacific Basin Telehealth Resource Centre in Hawaii. I met Christina about 4 or 5 years ago in Hawaii and then especially, but ever since, we've recognised the synergies that she can provide and is so generously provided in terms of particularly the implementation and rollout of our virtual programs across the Pacific. So Christina currently works at the Social Science Research Institute at the University of Hawaii in Manoa and is co-director, as I say, of the Pacific Basin Telehealth Resource Centre. She conducts research in higher education, technology, and communication and media. The publications have been in health information technology and telehealth challenges in the US affiliated Pacific Islands region, exploring key elements for successful telehealth implementation within severely under-resourced communities, and building healthier communities, the value co-creation within the chronic care model for rural under-resourced areas. The intent of her work is to identify and provide insight on key enablers for successful implementation of telehealth services in severely under-resourced and rural populations. She has a multidisciplinary PhD in communication and information sciences from the University of Hawaii. So Christina, when I met Christina 4 or 5 years ago, I must admit that one of the things that really took me was that she, in earlier days, was instrumental in introducing and supporting the communications within the Royal Flying Doctor Service in Australia. She was right there in that space. And the other thing that impressed me, which she might tell us about, was that she organised the transition of the earliest satellites that were providing principally, I think, meteorological information into the support of other areas of need, such as we're hearing about in telehealth by adopting the capacities in the US satellite systems to support our needs. So she's got a great background and a continuing commitment to the sorts of activities that we deliver. And I must say that she's been very generous in stretching that expertise and her own resources to assist with the activities of Anzgita across not only US sites, but non-US sites across the Pacific. So welcome, Christina, and we look forward to hearing your talk to us today. Thank you, Christina. Talking on one ocean that connects the US Pacific regional partnerships in telehealth and teleeducation. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you. Mahalo so much, Professor McRae. It's really lovely to be here. And you have a really good memory. That was a long time ago that we had that conversation. I'm going to talk about some of that history today as well. But first of all, I just want to congratulate Anzgita on, gosh, such an impressive portfolio that you just presented and all the amazing work that you've done to contribute to the Pacific Islands and all your member countries. Really, congratulations. You know, I am so honored to be a partner with such an impactful organization. You know, you hear a lot about different organizations, but I'm always impressed. I was texting Chris as you were reading your annual report saying, this is really impressive, you know, so beyond what I know of with the work that we do, you all do so much. So thank you again for inviting me to this meeting. What I'm hoping to do is share some information about our organization, to share a little bit more even maybe about the purview than you normally see us with for some of the sessions, and hope to encourage even further collaboration and synergies. So what I'd like to start with is an introduction of our program. We fall under TASI, that's the Telecommunications and Social Informatics Research Program at the University of Hawaii. And it's an acronym that actually has two meanings. In Samoan, TASI means one, and in Chamorro, which is the indigenous language of the Northern Mariana Islands, it means ocean or sea. So together, the word TOSI can mean one ocean or one sea that connects us. We are connected by the Pacific Ocean. We're also connected by telecommunications, and telecommunications brings us closer together. And so this name, TOSI, is really appropriate for us because we do have, as Professor McCrae just mentioned, we do have roots in telecommunications. And I would like to share this story about our history in the Pacific Islands and give you some context of how our program evolved over the years, and to share some information about our program values, because I think it really aligns with your program values as well. So the University of Hawaii operated the PSAT network, and that's the Pan-Pacific Education and Communication Experiments by Satellite, many years ago. Started in 1969, and it was operating for about 4 decades. And as Professor McCrae mentioned, I myself joined the program in the late 80s as a student satellite operator, working all the knobs there. And I've stayed on with the program as it evolved all the way through where it is today. But it started off as a communication with a mission of providing communications to the Pacific Islands. And so it was a technical network, and it was really based on repurposing test and weather satellites. So we used NASA, which is our US space agency's test satellites, and NOAA, our oceanic and atmospheric agency's weather satellites. And when those outlived their original purpose, for example, the weather satellite picture taking capabilities failed, the satellite was turned over to the University of Hawaii. And then we were able to use those satellites for communication in the Pacific. And that might not sound so impressive today, because anybody with internet now in the world were able to have a video conference with them. But in the early days of PSAT, there was no internet, there was no trans-Pacific fiber cables. And some of you may recall, the cost for Pacific Island communications with the Pacific Islands, even just a telephone call, may have been anywhere from $2.50 US to $4 US per minute for an audio call. So what we were able to do with this network was provide free satellite communications for multi-purposes, especially for distance learning, emergency management, and telehealth. And what I really wanted to emphasize was that we did have a sub-network. University of South Pacific was a network, and we had a kangaroo network. So all the way back many, many years ago, we had a really strong partnership with Australia that ran the sub-network called Kangaroo Net of PSAT. And that's where, as Professor McCrae mentioned, the Royal Flying Doctors used it for communication in rural areas in Australia. But I also wanted to mention that this PSAT network was Pacific-wide. It was region-wide. It wasn't just US affiliated. The core of the network, the operations may have been US funded, but it was also supported by local governments and organizations in the region. Today, we don't have a region-wide network like PSAT because, the internet has kind of taken the place of that type of infrastructure. So we don't have like something that's pulling us together or forcing us to work together, right? Because before there was no other alternative for this kind of video conferencing, multi-site video conferencing. We did all of that back then, even before the internet was able to do that. So now it leaves us without a really, really good inventory of who's doing what, in terms of distance learning and telehealth in the region, and maybe some lost opportunities of working together. But we're starting to see regional collaborations, and through partnerships like this one that we have with Anzgita, it really leverages for our work for the whole Pacific so that we can combine our efforts. And that's why we really value this kind of partnership. So just a few takeaways from the PSAT experience. We really need to maximize on the limited resource in our Pacific Islands. And to do this, we should collaborate and work across multi-sectors. We also need to be innovative and value, repurposed systems and networks and uses, and think outside of the box of the kinds of networks that we have available to us. And the other thing I want to emphasize is to focus on the strengths of the communities that we're working, because it's really easy to always talk about the gaps and the weaknesses and the low socioeconomic status, and what's lacking. But I think those of us that work in the region really have a respect for some of the richness in the communities, including, social capital, the strong sense of community and taking care of each other. And relationships are so important in the islands. So for us, developing and nurturing authentic and mutually respectful relationship with all our partners is really a core value of our program. So now I'd like to move into some of our current programs that TASI has. There's 3 major areas. We do have a training program called the Pacific International Training Desk, but this is not a health training program. It's actually meteorology and weather forecasting. And so this one does cover the whole of the Pacific because it's funded under an international program. And we bring people from all over the region to a 4-week in-person intensive meteorology training in Hawaii and in Guam. Of course, we've also had to take that, like everyone else, to distance learning in the last year and a half. The other program we operate is called the Pacific Health Informatics and Data Center. This is a health informatics program where we collect health claims data, clinical data, to do analysis for our Pacific partners to look at healthcare costs, quality, and access issues. And a big part of this program is also to build capacity of how to work with data, how to transform paper into electronic data, how to collect the electronic data for analyses as well, and even training on analyses. But what I'm mostly going to focus on in today's presentation is our telehealth initiatives. And that is my primary area of responsibility for TASI. And I operate the Pacific Basin Telehealth Resource Center, or PBTRC. And I thought it would be helpful to explain the structure of the Telehealth Resource Center's framework in the United States. We are one of 14 federally funded telehealth resource centers. We've been around for more than a decade. And there are 12 regional centers that cover all state and territories. So PBTRC serves the state of Hawaii, the US affiliated Pacific Island territories, as well as the Pacific Islands with a compact of free association with the United States. We have 2 national resource centers, one that's focused on policy and the other on technology. And the TRCs we provide technical assistance to healthcare providers. This involves everything to do with advancement of telehealth, but it does not allow us to provide direct clinical care. So I'm not able to fund equipment for clinical care or pay for services. Rather, we can support telehealth policy development, equipment selection, business model development, and workflow. And one of our major roles of PBTRC is matching need with available resources. And that's where our partnership, again, with Anzgita works out so well. So many of you are familiar with the systemic challenges in the Pacific Islands, the tiny populations and the fragile economies. The vast geographic distance makes it very expensive and difficult to serve because it's very expensive to travel there. And also, we know that it has the highest NCD-related deaths in the world. You are very, very familiar with the lack of specialty care and the expensive off-island referrals. But telecoms, through connecting us this way, has provided a lot of potential for bridging this gap for health, education, and clinical services. But the Pacific Islands it also has some of the highest telecom costs in the world. It's because of the vast geographic distances and the small population, so there's no economies of scale, right? But the good news is that there are more trans-Pacific fiber optic cables, the connectivity is getting better. There's Pacific Satellite Network, for example, that's providing pilot our stations to our health centers to introduce, more reliable and cost-effective satellite communications. And also, we're watching Elon Musk's Starlink because that's really going to provide a lot of opportunity for some of our most rural areas. But even before the pandemic, we were starting to see pockets of telehealth emerging with champions in the region just leading the way. So even if you have the telecommunication ability and connectivity, you really needed the people at the other end, the champions. And I always like to use Pohnpei as my example here with Payne Perman, who is a doctor in Pohnpei that launched many telehealth services, including telepathology in Japan. And it was actually Payne in Pohnpei and Mei Ling in Fiji that introduced me to Chris Hare. So I'm very thankful for that. And it was these providers that really articulated their need for the gastro teleeducation sessions with Anzgita. And we're going to hear more about that and the success of that program and the expansion of those topics very shortly in this presentation. But before we did that, I wanted to just talk a little bit about how COVID has offered innovation for some of our sites in the Pacific. There's practically no or very little COVID in the US affiliated Pacific Islands. Luckily, they closed their borders, but Guam needed to prepare for some periods of COVID surges because they only had one pulmonologist in their hospital, and they contracted a e-ICU service. And first they started off, if you kind of take a look to the left, there was this makeshift iPad on an IV stand, and I believe you see the wheels down there. I believe they told me they took that off of an office chair, so they kind of rigged up this mobile iPad. But soon after that, they were able to get equipment for a rounder. This is the picture on the right side, which is a 55-inch high definition monitor that they roll around the ICU. So the doctor here, I believe he's based in Florida, actually admits patients, he does rounds, he sees the patients through this big rounder. There are a lot of challenges for this project, but I'd like to just mention one challenge that turned out to maybe be a lessons learned and best practices. So Paula Manzon, who's here, she was managing this project, and the doctor at the remote side wanted a clinician to be his support person on the other side, but they had no available nurses, no nurses comfortable with the technology. So she said, I'm going to do the best that I can do, and I'm going to hire first year pre-med students, never on the floor, no clinical experience, but they know how to use iPads. And the doctor was not happy with that. But in the end, he said, those pre-med service students served as my eyes and ears. And more than that, they were my language and cultural translators, and they provided so much valuable support in providing direct care so far away. They communicated in their own language with the families. They were able to explain what was going on. And so I think that, this idea that the support person for the doc on the other end may not necessarily have to be a clinical person, but someone who could work with them remotely. Finally, I wanted to move on to a partnership with more information with our partnership with Anzgita and the regional collaboration in medical training. And this has been a huge success. As I mentioned before, it crosses the entire Pacific region. And for this, I wanted to invite Chris Hare to provide an update of these efforts. So I'm going to switch over to you, Chris, for the next couple slides.
Thanks, Christina. Thanks for inviting me to talk tonight, and just to give an update really on perhaps what the gastro program's been a little bit like and our opportunistic involvement in COVID-19 as non-specialists, but using our networks. To frame it, I guess the problem that we were faced with, and when I say we, I mean our colleagues across the Pacific, but particularly Fiji, at the early part of this year, was an absence of postgraduate level education, training, and CME, if you like, in the field of COVID-19. And we'd experienced that last year, Christina, when we conducted 4 brief but Pacific specific tele conferences on COVID-19 using Guam as our test nation, and we invited Australian and New Zealand, in fact global experts, to conduct and discuss COVID scenarios with the Pacific Island folk. So this year, on chance and in collaboration with William May and Mei Ling Perman and Dr. Shrish from Fiji, we use some of those networks to bring in COVID experts from Australia, New Zealand, the US, the UK, Singapore, to discuss COVID preparation, vaccination, problems and education, with expertise from Dr. Meru Shiel, epidemiologist and public health clinician, and a real motivator in this field from Australian National University. And of course, Adam Jenny, a clinician from the Alfred Hospital, but affiliated as Associate Professor at FNU. The reach of the RIPE series, I think we get to this in a minute, but has been 4 webinars in 2020, but expanded with the crisis in Fiji to 14 so far in 2021. Next, do I click on the slide here, Frank, or do you go? There we go. And just as a brief snapshot of some of these seminars to show you the estimated numbers of folk attending, we started collecting some of the data in July. And we were noticing numbers of people attending from around the Pacific, from anywhere from 40 to a peak of 140, which possibly matches very close to the peak of the COVID crisis in Fiji. The series and subjects has been the brainchild of Meru, Adam, myself, Mei Ling, William May, but we've brought that through Christina's team's help and pre-existing networks, as I said, across the Pacific. You might go to the next slide. And as a snapshot, just to give the audience a rundown of who attended, this was an example from the RIPE series on the 12th of August. This series was, the guest speakers to this series were Chris Leong, a previous Anzgita trainer and current member, and his colleagues at the Austin Hospital, who provided an expert account of radiological and clinical findings in COVID-19. And that series was attended by no less than 37 medical officers from around the Pacific, 14 that notated themselves as academic or associated with the Fiji National University in different forms, 7 affiliated university workers such as librarians and otherwise, 3 public health clinicians, including Meru Shiel, 6 nurses and 5 students. Next slide. And of our Pacific Gastro sessions, we have conducted this year, I think we've conducted 8 so far, with Dr. Sam Hall, Emily Pruitt, Nick Hanna, Tony Rahman, Chris Leong, Chris Kiley, and of course Finn McRae, in conjunction with Mei Ling leading the way with the vision for what this looks like from the Fiji side, and her helpers being Dr. Vikash and Dr. Aminiasi, and of course Joji Malani sharing their wisdom as to what they want from Anzgita. The participant count, you'll notice, is a little bit less, of course, but nonetheless, this goes across the Pacific, and we have people, when they can attend, from various island nations. I would just add to the RIPE series, particularly the contributors, and some of you will recognise some of these folk, but led by Meru and Adam, we've had Chris Blythe, Alan Cheng, Steve McLaughlin and James McMahon from the Alfred, Julie Leask talking about mandates, communications, and has been a superstar for us. Michael Gold, Hugh and Tran, Dale Fisher from Singapore, Simon Barry from Cardiff, sharing the respiratory knowledge of the UK crisis. Reynold Ofanoa from Tonga as a public health lead, William May, Lakshmi Santosh from San Francisco as a respiratory pulmonologist and critical care pulmonologist. And our partnerships that have allowed this to facilitate are quite wide and broad, including Internal Medicine Organisation of the Pacific, the Pacific Basin Medical Association, SPC, the increasingly the Papua New Guinea Medical Association, FNU and the RACS Global Health Committee. And of course, the real heroes in championing all of this have been our colleagues through the Pacific, but particularly of mention are our Fiji clinicians for the RIPE series, because it's been their discussion and their talanoa, if you like, that allows us to facilitate a real Pacific specific discussion. I think that's what's unique about both Gastro and the RIPE series. And just to very briefly, just to mention and highlight that Dr. Mei Ling has been effortless and as Finn said, infatigable in her championing of these projects. So thank you, Mei Ling. And I think that's the final of that slide for me. Back to Christina.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, it's so impressive. And, you know, just bringing a session like that together, and you named so many different organizations that really helped to, if there were silos in your region, like we have in our region, it really helped to bring people together, you know, and that was something that we didn't always work with our neighbors sometimes. And when COVID came, we were having to just talk with everybody and work with everybody and roll up our sleeves and just jump right in. And I think that there's so much opportunities for regional collaboration. That's a point I really wanted to make in this presentation, that there are so much needs. We all know that. Some of it are very unique, but there's also some commonalities across the Pacific, across the whole Pacific. And what I've been finding is that there's better alignment when the support comes from within the region. So that's for me saying, you know, our East Coast US or our US partners, sometimes they don't understand all of the environment that we're dealing with in the Pacific Islands. But our partnership with Anzgita has been a gold star model for collaboration, really. It had really helped to bridge some of the funding restrictions and limitations of where we can go and things that we can or cannot do in terms of, you know, equipment or clinical care. But it just helped us to get a wider reach. But I really think that the peer-to-peer support in their model of training, and like you said, I'm going to try to say it, the Pacific specific content is what I've seen come and go, you know, without really getting the voices of the Pacific, but it has stayed in this project. It's really working. And so I don't know if there's a collaborative, like the Asia Pacific Island Regional Collaborative for Telehealth and Health Education. I'm not sure if there's something like that already, but I believe that there's a need for us to coordinate some of these opportunities, kind of like what I was saying before with the PSAT, where we had something that brought us together and we had an inventory, we knew what people were doing, maybe just even for sharing information. So I believe we need a collaborative like that across our Asia Pacific Island region. So to end with, just looking at the final takeaways, although it may sound cliche, you know, the telehealth champions are so important, and committed people like yourself, like the local champions that are out there. We need those people who are persistent, who can work through barriers. Maybe they're technical barriers, maybe they're administrative barriers, but people who are going to just keep working at it, who has a clear vision of what it is that we're trying to do and can articulate that vision to others. You know, that's so important to keep the project going. Because I know, Chris, if you found like a great project and you don't have a good, strong local support who can overcome some of those barriers, it really keeps going in circle. It doesn't really go anywhere. We need to acknowledge that the infrastructure and resources are a major constraint in the islands. And some of the common telehealth issues that I hear in the US, like, you know, issues with reimbursement, liability, patient privacy, you know, they're not yet overbearing concerns, because if you're looking at the risk management, the severity of the health issues out there and the health resources and needs are so high that using telehealth or using the teleeducation can be really seen to reduce those risks for the providers that are trying their best out in the islands. Sometimes I have a hard time explaining that to my colleagues in the US, where they think, oh, this is like a privacy issue, or we really do we cover all the HIPAA issues to be able to provide this video conference service? And, you know, it's really hard when they're not there to see that that is a low priority right now. The risk is much higher if you don't provide this kind of support and care. So finally, again, just to emphasize the opportunity, there's a window of opportunity for regional and international collaboration in telehealth. And I welcome any thoughts or interests of how we might organize or grow such a collaborative, just even to share information and leverage each other's efforts. So again, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak with you today and to share this information. And for the years of partnerships, I look forward to many more. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. That was fantastic. I'm sure it was enlightening to all of the people on the call here, just the breadth and commitment that you have to the region through the digital technologies that you manage. So thank you very much for joining us tonight for our annual general meeting. Now we've got time for questions, but as you think of questions, I'd just like to acknowledge our supporters. And Frank, I don't know whether have we got a slide of our supporters, but I'll mention them. Whiteley's have been fantastic with repeated provision of cleaning chemicals. JGH Foundation, Cantel, JGH Foundation, very generous, particularly in supporting the Tonga initiative. Our close liaison with the College of Surgeons, as we go forward to being on the ground, that becomes more and more important. Olympus Medical, for their provision of equipment in several of our sites, as do Pentax. CR Kennedy, always great supports. Never say no seems to be the CR, always say yes, seem to be the CR Kennedy support for our activities. New Zealand has been fantastic, and I know Michael Schultz is there waving the flag for New Zealand, so I'd like to wave it too. For Michael, for the medical school in Dunedin, and also the New Zealand Society of Gastroenterology. Boston Scientific, CR Surgitech have given us tremendous support and direct equipment support, consumables. Pentax, I've mentioned, the Royal Australasian College of Physicians, Cook Medical, GISA, who are always strong behind us in supporting us, as is Genka, and the Sydney International Endoscope Societies, many of those providing virtually free access to their meetings for promoting our activities. So thank you to all those of our supporters. We couldn't do what we do without that support, and we look forward to your ongoing engagement with us in the future in the most effective ways that you can possibly do it. So thank you. So I think we've got about 6 or 7 minutes for any questions before the 7 o'clock call off for the meeting. So Frank's going to be managing the questions and answers.
Yep. Finn, there was one question for Christina about, she mentioned some of the entrepreneurial work by some of these champions. Could you talk a little bit more about some of the examples, was the request, Christina?
Okay, yes. So the telehealth champions in the Pacific have so much, they have to do so much because they have so little resources, that when they are trying to promote something like telehealth, that is a lot of work, because they have to look for funding for equipment, for space, for personnel, for example. And I can just give you an example of the Ponape with pain permit, as I mentioned. He came to our conference in Hawaii, and we were just doing basic telehealth 101. We were showing Zoom for the first time. This is in 2016. And he sat there and he realized that they have had fiber optics for many, many years in Ponape. And he was doing some, I think, informal, Chris, I believe he might have been doing some informal teleconsults with you, but the light bulb just went on. We can do so much more with telehealth. So he had to go back to Ponape, and he basically set up a telehealth room to negotiate the telecommunication rate from $5,000 a month for 10 megabits to lower than that, to like a couple $100 a month, and then ask his hospital manager to reallocate the funds for that. And then once he got the telehealth going, he was able to work with Hokkaido Cancer Center for Telepathology. And this is where they're actually doing real-time diagnoses with the specimen being transmitted through the video conference. And what that was doing was also training the lab technician, because he was able to see abnormalities as they were being diagnosed. So then that was in Pohnpei. And so then they were able to take some of their lab work from their neighboring states like Chuuk, Pap smear labs, and they didn't have to send it off island. They were able to do those reads right there in Pohnpei. So, that capacity of building the telehealth room built the capacity not only of the individual technician, but of the whole institutional capacity building for Pohnpei Hospital to be able to do like that kind of regional reads. And that was one example. That telehealth room also was used for teleconsultations with Shriners Hospital for Children, interactive video conferencing for remote echoes in the field, and then coming back. And if there was any very difficult case, they would send it by store and forward to a large hospital here in Honolulu. So that was the beginning of a store and forward cardiology. So this is an unusual story. Because you had an unusual, exceptional person just tearing down all the barriers, right? We had the same workshop and the same fired up providers who went home in other islands, and it just ended. All their hopes and dreams to do telehealth just ended because someone said no, and then the administrator said, "There's no money. Period. We can't do this," and that was it. So. When I talk about innovation, it wasn't only like clinical innovations, but it was really how to overcome these very big challenges. And that's kind of what I was referring to in the talk today.
Chris, you had a question?
Oh, I had a couple. But it is interesting, as Christina has highlighted, with someone like Payne, so innovative and so much of a champion that just got that up and rolling and probably led the way really at that time, particularly in the Northern Pacific. But then it can come crashing down when the funding stops, and you need that ongoing. My question was possibly probably the one I'd ask is, when do you expect that places like Kiribati and the smaller island nations will come online? I noticed that Tokelau had a cable right up to it just laid this week, or if not last week. So that's really exciting as well.
Right. Yeah, so there's two parts to that question. One would be the technical infrastructure. When will they have the reliability of the telecommunication links, right? And that if the fiber comes up right there, then the next question is it going to be affordable? Because we've seen in the past that even if the fiber lands and the services still may not be affordable for a lot of use of it. The next question would be, like in Payne's case, it was about 3 years that they had fiber optics on Pohnpei, and it wasn't until a light bulb went off to say, hey, this is how we can use it. But I think because of the kinds of sessions that you're having, people are exposed to, these opportunities, and maybe the frustration of trying to log on and then it just didn't work. They know of the opportunity. So maybe that part will be a quicker transition from services comes and now telehealth services. And when I say telehealth, we mean telehealth is a big umbrella that includes clinical as well as education. So it's both our direct clinical services plus kind of teleeducation that we're doing. So Chris, I don't know if that answers your question. Like, I don't have a specific timeline, but those are the factors that we have to look at in terms of coming online for having the technical capability and then being ready to actually adopt it. Now, in the US affiliated Pacific Islands, there's pockets of telehealth, but it's still not widely adopted. In Hawaii, before the pandemic, only 20% of healthcare providers use telehealth. And then after the pandemic, I mean, it went up to, almost the majority of them had to use it because we had to stay at home order, right? But even in Guam, when they had a surge, the hospital was using it because their ICU needed help. But, behavioral mental health and other things that they really need help for, they're still not adopting it, the patients. So we're trying to figure that out. There's a cultural aspect to it as well. Like they still would rather see the doctor in person. And so we have a lot of work still to do at that front. I do think that what you're doing is at the forefront of, like if you want to talk about your Palau project, I think that is really where the next steps are. I don't think direct to consumer is it, that the islands are ready for telehealth in their homes, just dialing up to a doctor. But I think it's providing the support to the providers and the health systems, like what you're focusing on. I think that is our very next step in telehealth development.
So the hour's up and we promised everyone it would only be an hour, but we do want to keep you online, Christina, for any post-AGM questions that might come from the audience. So before I close officially the OGM, but leave it open for discussion, I'd like to once again thank you, Christina. Thank the members for all their support and interest in Anzgita. And as I've said before the board, for all their great activity. And once again, commend you to look at the annual report, which will be uploaded onto the homepage immediately following this meeting. So I declare the meeting closed now, but we will keep the channel open for further discussions and comments for those that want to stay. And thank you for everybody who've been generous with your time in attending the AGM of Anzgita. Thank you.
In closing, Peter Catalaris would like to say something.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Finn, with your very warm commendation of your directors and other workers in Anzgita, you failed to mention yourself. So it's very important that we all acknowledge your long-standing leadership and invaluable wisdom and work for the whole organisation. You've been very much the driving force in the blue for over a decade, and I think it's very important that we all acknowledge that at the AGM. So thanks very much, and I'm sure everybody agrees with those sentiments.
Thank you, Peter. It's been a privilege and pleasure to be part of this organisation and join all our efforts together for a common cause.
Christina, Chris had another question which was related to what one I was going to ask too. Whether, in the funding that's required, do you think, philanthropic groups, the large ones might be more interested going forward in what you're talking about in the Pacific in terms of collaboration, the projects that might come from that? And also when you look at the US government and the Australian government, for that matter, New Zealand governments, they all seem to be getting more interested in supporting the Pacific nations. I wonder if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yes, absolutely. I'll start with the first one, and the philanthropic support. That definitely, okay, so I'm not sure if it's because of our former administration, I'm not sure why, but in our former US administration, I saw a lot more philanthropic activity, and maybe it was because we needed that kind of support for underserved populations and vulnerable populations. Now, I would like to say that because of COVID, I think there is a heightened awareness about digital equity and health equity issues, because there was a time when we were all at home, not able to leave anywhere, and unless you had broadband connectivity, your children, if you had broadband connectivity, your children would be able to go to school, you could work, and maybe even see a doctor. But if you didn't have broadband connectivity, you were left out of society completely. And that was a really big problem when our entire school children, all our school children were at home. So it really heightened the awareness of broadband connectivity, the need for equity and access to broadband for education, healthcare, and commerce. So there's a lot of money, more money than I have ever seen, being invested in the United States in broadband infrastructure development as well as telehealth. So that was the first answer to the first question. And the second question, can you remind me again really quickly?
Well, just the large philanthropic groups. I suppose everyone thinks Gates Foundation, but there's others. About whether you think they're becoming more alert and aware of the Pacific as a region that needs support.
Oh, yes. Yes, right. Yes, the philanthropic groups is definitely and in showing up and looking at health projects like telehealth and infrastructure and things like that. But the question that you had was about the interest in the Pacific. And again, it's a political thing, but it started even in the last administration, where I had not ever seen such high level of US government officials traveling throughout the Pacific, because of the geopolitical threats, basically with China, et cetera. And so there's the soft politics of how do we support this region for health, education, and other social development kinds of projects. And so I think that it is a good time for us to take advantage or strategically partner with some of that. Now, a lot of the Pacific Islanders will be leery about what the money is tied to, and we should be, right? And so we have to be very careful that if there's funding opportunities, then we understand strings attached to it for sure. There's some things that politically, it's way beyond my pay grade to strategically figure things like that out. But I have seen, the interest in at the federal government level, a really big interest in helping develop partnerships, friendships in the Pacific Islands. And I think my attitude towards that is, if they want to do something, then we should be a part of that conversation. Our Pacific partners should be part of that conversation to direct where and what is going to be done with that. Otherwise, they're going to invest in something to show that, check the list off, there's like X millions and millions of dollars that was invested in here. So we might as well be part of that discussion to make sure that the investment is appropriate and that is in something that will be longstanding and needed. That's my own opinion, and I'm not even tenured yet at the University of Hawaii, so I'm not sure I can freely speak about all of these things, but I just did. So anyway, that's my opinion.
Christina, I'd like to ask you about the last 10 metres from the expensive fibre optic cables that doesn't quite get to the point of the user end.
Yes.
That's been a problem we've faced in our experience. How do you address that?
Yeah, so it is an infrastructure problem. I've recently seen some interesting developments in technology. I just call it like super Wi-Fi routers, where they have a much bigger coverage, so that the cable may land somewhere, maybe at a school, and they have this super Wi-Fi coverage where it's very good coverage for a whole community. So we're looking at some options like that. But some projects that we have going on right now that I think are interesting are really equipping your public places with broadband connectivity. So one of my favorite projects right now is our Hawaii Telehealth Access Points, Hawaii TAPS project. And we have partnered with our Department of Health and with our state library system. And so our state libraries already have 1 gigabit of connectivity in all the libraries, and they have some Chromebooks even out there. So what we've partnered with them to do is to have a room dedicated for telehealth. The Department of Health got a grant for health navigators to help people to come to the library if they don't have connectivity at home for their telehealth visit. They will get someone to support them in the library to use the telehealth room, use the broadband there. And even we're working out the protocols for after the telehealth visit, that person may get navigational support services like, okay, your doctor said you need to get your meds from here, here, and here, and we're going to help you get transportation, and we're going to help to make sure that you pick up your meds. So it's built in a more of a support system, right? But to address that last mile connectivity issue as well, we're equipping the libraries with MiFi units, which is like remote internet, mobile internet access points. And the library will loan them out to people who need it. And this is specifically for telehealth access, but they can use it for other things as well. So Professor McRae, that is a really difficult problem to solve if we're talking that the landing is really, really too far away, and that local loop is not, it's not a short local loop, it's like miles and miles and miles. Then, you know, you're really talking about infrastructure development. And that's where I'm thinking the satellite options that are coming out, where it doesn't require a lot of the ground infrastructure development, but the satellites will be able to, there's so many satellites with such good coverage that basically anywhere in the world, if they have the Earth station available to them, they would be able to reach that satellite and get connectivity at sufficient speeds for, say, a telehealth consult. So I'm thinking that this problem we've been trying to solve for decades and decades and decades of getting to the most remote places may be soon to be solved with these new types of satellite technologies and services. And we actually, I didn't mention this, but the Starlink system with Elon Musk, we're actually getting a couple of units, and we'll test it here in Hawaii. And we had a request to test it in Yap, in the Federated States of Micronesia. So something is very remote, and to just really try it out and run it through the test to see what's all involved in something like that. Those satellite companies are also developing these telehealth kits, like suitcases with telehealth scopes and equipments on the go that then connect with the satellite Earth stations, that all of this can be mobile to reach the most rural places. So those are things on the horizon.
We want to bring in Mei Ling or Amini, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can see that Mei Ling is participating. I believe we've got Amini online as well. Or she's just dropped off actually. Maybe Amini is still there. There she is, Mei Ling.
Hello.
So Mei Ling, you might have been online, but when Christina asked me to talk around the RIPE series and the gastro webinars, and you're the champion of these projects in so many ways. I would just wondered, with the year that you've had both academically and in clinical work, what has telehealth meant to you, telemedicine meant to you, and how have you used it in Fiji in the academic sense and in your clinical work?
Thanks, Chris. Sorry, I just joined in quite late. I wasn't aware that there was a meeting, but Amini and Dikash told me about it just a few minutes ago. Anyway, but I heard mostly what Christina was saying. And yeah, so thank you for having me on that question. Right. Telehealth, what it means to me. Well, I think what we've been doing all this while after after all the endoscopy, hands-on activities, when you're all gone and we're all alone here in Fiji, Amini, myself, and Vikash, when we start having, issues endoscopically, not being able to recognize certain pathologies and, needing some advice, and getting on Viber or Messenger, and, contacting Chris or any of the other gastroenterologists that have been to Fiji, like Ian Turner, having that backup support, it really helps develop us. It's not only during the hands-on training, but when you're gone and we're alone and we're, Googling things and checking up other pathologies on images on the books you've provided, and having that support from Anzgita trainers. That's one. The other one is, it's not only the gastroenterologists, but also the GENCA, members, the nurses, Anzgita nurse members, helping us troubleshooting, either real time or post procedure, getting the advice. So telementoring in that sense. And then the other bit on these monthly sessions with the Anzgita trainers, familiar faces or some new ones, in an environment where learning is, it's very friendly, non-threatening, and that, as Pacific Islanders, we need that. We tend to be quiet most of the time, but having that friendly atmosphere during telehealth sessions, that also helps us a lot. Every time you're helping us, the providers on site, you're also obviously helping the people, the communities, and also the governments. Where you're saving patients from going overseas because we're able to, diagnose and treat locally, through the advice we get also from telehealth, telementoring. The other one is the real-time endoscopy happening, for example, in Pohnpei, or some other sites where they need help at the time. We're available on these what do you call them, the using these cellular service, again through either Messenger or Viber or sometimes Zoom, helping in real time. So overall, I think telehealth, telementoring, telegastro, they've really helped us advance in our delivery of services. And, that's one of the main, advantage of knowing the trainers in Anzgita, because you're always there. You're very approachable, and your what would be, it's like your mission to help, to transfer skills, knowledge it's really in fruition all these years. It's been since 2008 when the training program started here, and I think we've done a lot. And now we're into ERCP, and I'm not sure if Amini is making use of telehealth, but I think we do in terms of the equipment we have. We use it to troubleshoot when we're facing problems with the reporting system, or maybe the what do you call that one? The Medivata. So yeah, so it's been all in what's his name? Sorry, I've forgotten. But the one word that keeps coming to mind is it's been marvelous right throughout. So yeah, I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mei Ling. That's very generous comments that we probably don't deserve, but thank you anyway for passing them on.
Thank you, Professor. And I hope you liked Pohnpei when you were there.
Oh yeah, enjoyed Pohnpei. Yeah.
We don't have any other questions, Finn, that have come in.
Any other takers? There's still about 10 or so on the call. 18. I can see Ian Roberts Thompson. I can see.
May I make a comment on what Mei Ling said? Mei Ling, you said some really important things that I've observed as what has made it successful in this partnership that you have with Anzgita, and that is knowing the people, that relationships, having the long-term connectivity and partnership with them, the understanding that you said they make you feel comfortable, and that, because I've seen other trainers come into the region, right? And they mean well, right? But they come and then maybe it's a great holiday for being on an island, and then they're gone and they never see them again. Sometimes there's other things that just didn't click. And so what I've been trying to figure out is it's all about relationships. So some of the providers in the island say that they do consults with their friend or someone they know. I know a maternal fetal medicine specialist, I'll call her, but they're all informal, which is the way also of the islands. But I was trying to figure out if there's a need, how can we formalize some of that so that there are providers who are available, who would like to help, that people know that they're available and that they're available to provide this help. And there's like the Swinfin network in the UK. There are 400 volunteer providers, and it's all free provider to provider consultation. But I was just wondering if there was anything like that in the Pacific region, because if you're going to refer your patients later, it might be nice to refer them to somebody who has been working with your provider and have that kind of continued relationship. So I was just thinking, Mei Ling, from what you said, there's so many very key things in there that makes it successful. And I was wondering if there is a need to kind of organize that so other places can also gain access to that kind of more formalized way of support.
Oh, thank you, Christina. I think so. I think it's really the success is to do with the relationship we have with Anzgita trainers. Professor McCrae and Peter Catalaris and all of them. They've really made it so easy for us to just feel free sharing what our issues are, what our problems are. And so. Yeah, that relationship, I think, is really the main underlying reason why it's so successful, I would say. Yeah. Thank you, Christina.
Hey Ling, it's Chris here. Just picking up on what Christina has said, these are questions that I have in my own mind with our colleagues like, Follow in Samoa and Latoa in Tonga to a certain extent, even Seriana in Vanuatu. And there's a lot of, there are some really significant networks and relationships, the Samoan relationship with New Zealand, Tonga with New Zealand and the networks. Has anyone in the Pacific or in New Zealand perhaps, or even globally, has anyone actually mapped out those networks? Because some of them are really long-standing. And, for providers like Anzgita who might be thinking about answering Joji's call for endocrinology, those things are really ones that we should be tapping into or looking at assisting. I don't know if that's already been done or already been thought of, but mapping those networks and relationships would be really interesting.
Yeah, I think probably, I think most of these Pacific Island countries, they do have a relationship with, hospitals in New Zealand, Australia, Hawaii, the Philippines, other places. And they have their, what's probably common to them is a referral committee. So each hospital has a referral committee made of usually the heads of departments, and they discuss cases, and when that's approved, then they communicate with other hospitals that would accept them. So already, I think all these years, all these island countries, they have their relationships with other, like you mentioned, I think Tonga is New Zealand. A lot of them have connections with hospitals in New Zealand. They have their referral committees, and so there's already a network there. But I also noticed that sometimes they may have those hospitals overseas accepting these patients. But sometimes these people like Lotoa, they do contact us and ask for our networks. Do we know anybody else? So, we tend to tap into, our lecturers, the other consultants that provide the academic training here. We sometimes connect them to other specialists. So there is that network, but I don't know whether, like you said, maybe we need to make it a bit more formal, maybe, I'm not sure. But it's been happening informally.
Might be something for the Internal Medicine of the Pacific organization to look into.
Yes.
So I see no other questions. What I do see is that we've got one of our Swiss members still on the call at this late point. So Caspar, he's in Switzerland at the moment. So thank you for being with us, Caspar. I think he's just dropped off, actually. No, he's still there. Just shows you our reach. We're into Switzerland. So if there's no other business, I'll leave it to Frank to work out whether there's any other.
No, there's no other business, Finn. Up to you to finish the meeting.
Okay. Well, thank you. We're closing the informal part of the meeting. Thank you, Christina. Again, you've been a great support. We're very grateful for all your direct support to us, and we love the partnership. So let's continue on. And thank you, Barb, for all your work pulling this together, and for the annual report again. Terrific.
No worries. It was fun.
And Frank, the indefatigable Frank, indispensable Frank, for your support too.
The joint venture, that annual report with Frank. Yes.
Good one.
And thanks for joining us from Switzerland, Caspar. I can still see you there. So good night, everybody. Have a good evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you in Anzgita activities digitally or on the ground as we go on. Thank you very much.
Bye, Christine. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Hey. Frank, I put it up on the website.
Oh, good.
So
Thanks.
it's in 3 locations there.
Great.
And it's
Thank
just the
you,
flip
Bob.
book.
Thank you, Frank.
Oh, there's
Oh, hey, Marlene.
still there. Thanks, Mei-Ling, for
Good
joining in.
night.
I wanted to, Mei-Ling, before
Yeah.
you go, I just wanted to put you up as promote you to panelist, but I thought you may not want to be without warning, because I didn't know what you'd want to be looking with on your camera or not.
I accidentally came to know about this meeting when I went on Viber. So anyway, thank you very much.
Okay.
Have a look at the report, Mei-Ling, because your lovely photo is there.
Oh, thank you, Bob.
Featured
and your-
prominently.
And
I
your
knew
words.
resources. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks.
Good night.
Yeah, that went
Yes.
it went well, didn't it? Yeah, I think it seemed to all come together. Thank you.
You're welcome. Just on the PDF, hard to upload, so we'll have to do that Wednesday.
All right. Okay.
I'll just leave that. The flip book's up.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Righto. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, yeah. The flip book's up. Yeah, because that's in the cloud, whereas the PDFs, yeah, be a bit different. Yeah. Okay.
So I inserted the PDF, the proper one, but it comes up as about Anzgita for some reason. So,
All right.
so I just need to.
Yeah,
just
okay, right,
have
I
a
will.
look at it. Yeah.
Catch up on Wednesday. Righto. Good.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Bob.
Fabulous. Yay!
Yeah.
Wine.
Couldn't agree more.
See you, buddy.
Yeah.